The readings this morning follow on from our reading from last week. Last week, for those who were here and those maybe who weren't, Jesus healed, cast out the evil spirit in the man in the synagogue. And then they left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew and found Simon's mother-in-law who was ill in bed, and Jesus healed her. Now, this is a story that we've heard many times, but it's important to just remind ourselves of the context of this story. We don't recognise some of the barriers that Jesus stepped over in doing this healing. Jesus touched someone who was sick. He went into the bedroom, or wherever the bed was, of Simon's mother-in-law and touched her as a woman and healed her. In those actions, Jesus was doing things that were not the right thing to be doing. But Jesus showed that he was willing to step over some of the boundaries for the healing of this person, Simon's mother-in-law. The fact that then she got up and began to serve is also indicating to us that one of the impacts of people being ill is they're not able to do the things they normally do. Now, for us, when we're ill, usually someone will do the things that are important around us, and we have holiday, if we're working, we have holiday pay and sick leave to enable us to get better. But of course, in Jesus' time there, if someone was ill, the impact and them not being able to do their role within the community could have a major impact on the well-being of that family and the way the family was functioning, and have big implications for them. So Simon's mother-in-law being able to get up and to serve was showing that she got up and went back to the things that she would normally do. Interesting, that link with serving and the women who continued to serve Jesus along the way. And Jesus' words of not coming to be served, but to serve. And the women who stuck with Jesus right to the end, even to his time on the cross. And they were still there serving him and being with him. We then move on to the healing of other people at sunset. And of course, the reference to sunset is that it's moving on to the next day. So he wasn't healing on Saturday for them. And the people brought people to be healed around. Now, this healing ministry that Jesus portrayed is an essential part of the liberation that Jesus was bringing. Liberation not to just the people who were not well, but also a liberation in the barriers and boundaries that he stepped over to people's role within the community. And his compassion and concern for people. He's reaching out and to set them free from those things that oppress them, as he did last Sunday's reading and this Sunday's reading. And Jesus shows that in the healing that he has compassion and concern for these people. For at the time, illness was associated with impurity or sin. Remember the readings we had where people asked who sinned to cause the tower that fell and people were hurt, and Jesus' response. Illness was seen as being something, if you were ill, then you'd done something wrong, you had sinned, or there was some impurity. And in that state, it meant that you were excluded from full status within the community. So by Jesus reaching out and touching the woman and healing her, his actions show that her re-inclusion into the community, that her illness was no longer a barrier. Jesus seeks always to restore the social wholeness denied to the people by the things that had happened to them. He worked against the segregation of people of in and out. He challenged the prevailing social barriers and the class barriers. Because of course, as now, then, the people who got ill in a greater frequency were the people at the lower social end of the scale. Just as today we find that people who live in low socio-economic areas tend to have worse health and worse health outcomes. In Jesus' time, it's those people who were at the lower end that needed the most healing. And that's why Jesus was a threat to the civic order, to the established order, by reaching out to those who were excluded and bringing a sense of inclusion to these people. Healing that set people free. Healing that enabled them to continue to be liberated and to continue to do the things that Jesus was calling them to do. At the end of this passage, it must have been tempting for Jesus to think that there were more people to heal and that he could stay there and heal many more people and become a celebrity, or his influence, his popularity would rise in that situation. But instead of doing that, we see in the reading that Jesus went to a lonely place where he prayed. In our culture, where becoming a celebrity and the celebrity syndrome is deeply ingrained upon our culture, and people's sense of importance in being somewhat of a celebrity, and all that goes with that, runs contrary to the way that Jesus was operating. Jesus went to a deserted place to be re-energized, and speaks to us of our need to be re-energized, but it also speaks of the need to reset his agenda, to retouch with what his real purpose was, which was not about his own sense of importance and his status, but continuing to be and to embody that message of the kingdom of God. He knew clearly what he was on about. In my reading in the past week, I've been reading a book called The Infinite Game. Now, The Infinite Game is a book about infinite games, finite games and infinite games. Finite games that is defined like a game of football, where you've got clear rules, you've got a set group of people who are players and a defined outcome, and the outcome is known at the end of the time, at the end of the game. The infinite game, rather, there's not clear rules. It's not a game that finishes in a set time, it's a game that continues on. And the book is talking about that if we play life like a finite game, we can go for popularity at a particular time, but in the long haul, it's not about popularity, it's about continuing in the game. It's not about winning, but continuing the journey. One of the things about an infinite game is that he defines, Simon Sinek wrote the book, the just cause is an important part of the infinite game. Knowing what we're on about, a specific vision of the future state that we're working towards. Now see, Jesus was very clear on what his just cause was. The just cause by Simon Sinek is defined as something that's affirmative and optimistic. It's inclusive and open to all who would like to contribute. It's service orientated for the primary benefit of others. It's about resilience and being able to endure even the political, technological and cultural change. It's idealistic, big and bold, and ultimately difficult to achieve, but something that we work towards. With Jesus' recalibration at his time in the desert and deciding to move on, it's because he had a sense of a just cause. And I think this speaks to us of the importance of what's the cause that we are working towards. What is it about the kingdom of God? And how do we engage with people? And to be aware of those ways that we can actually see the boundaries that exist in our culture as boundaries that we find it hard to move over. Boundaries maybe where there are certain people with illnesses that we would be very careful around, or boundaries of social class that we find it difficult to get over. And yet Jesus reached out and wanted to open up the kingdom of God to everyone. But for us, the boundary is also the difference between Christian and non-Christian. That God created the whole world and wants us to share his love with the whole world. These words and this story today from Mark's Gospel reminds us of the way that we reach out with compassion to the people around us. How we are and how we engage and how we embody God's presence. I've been doing some reading around compassion. And I'll talk some more about that at another time. But one of the things that they talk about with compassion is that when you reach the point where you're more concerned for others than yourself, that actually has an impact on who we are and what has an impact on what we do, and leads to a betterment of the community and the people around us. And I think that's what Jesus' compassion, as he looked on the people in need and healed them, liberated them, it's compassion that we need to look for. So maybe compassion is something that as we think of our mission and the way we engage with our community as we move back to face-to-face worship, as we think about what we will do in the new building when it's finished and our preparation for that. Maybe compassion is an important word for us, and thinking about how we engage in bringing that message of God's love and God's healing presence to those around us, not just in words, but in our actions. Because we have a gospel not just to proclaim, but we are servants of God, and we have actions to do on God's behalf for the sake of the world, for the sake of God's kingdom. We're going to sing together the hymn, "You servants of God, your master proclaim."